we need to go back to the drawing book and be like, what does that mean? Right now, Kenyans define that as somebody who has money or like comes from a particular tribe. We need to redefine it, okay? Because just because you have money doesn't mean you have ethics, value. Like, what are your values? Foresight. Where do you want to drive this country to, right? You just happen to have money. Cool. Yeah. There's so much more we need from that makes a good leader, and because we haven't defined it, we're kind of moving blind. And because we think we don't deserve it, there's a feeling of like, oh, but things have always been like this. Yeah. But they don't always have to be like this. Absolutely. And so, yeah, man, that one, I can go on, and I might get you banned. So.
No. Well, it begs the question, Adelle, I have to ask, is there a political future for you?
Worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then, we say, hold on.
Do you have a vision for the Adelle that you want to be in 5 years' time?
Oh my goodness, yes. You know, I was telling my friend, I'm getting excited. I was telling my friend the other day, people like, when you see all of these interviews and people like, what motivates you to wake up every morning? And it's like a lot of these technical stuff, like I'm on the grind and I'm on the hustle that I don't subscribe to. But like, for me, I want to meet the freest version of me. And I just feel like she's so close. So that's why I'll keep doing the work, like if it's going to therapy, doing the work in terms of taking care of like my physical, doing the work in terms of like exploring all the business opportunities I want to explore, like build the businesses you want. Why not? Who said it just has to be one? If you want to go back to school, like do that. And it's just like, I feel like doing all of these things brings me closer to the freest version of me. And so my motivation every morning is like, how do we get closer to that chick? Like, she seems like she's going to be awesome, right? And I think many times we get stuck on like motivations being like, oh, where do you want to see? You know, in interviews, you'll be asked like, where do you want to see yourself in 3 years or in 2 years? And people always answer with like very technical or like tangible material things,
or
like
measurable things.
My business will be here, or like whatever. Sour, no problem. But I feel like the person driving you there is who we need to focus on.
Absolutely, that's the body you'll arrive there in. So.
And so for me, it's just like in 5 years I'll be 40, and I want to be a freer version of this person sitting here today. And I'm very excited, and I really do wish the universe grants me the opportunity to see her, you know?
You know, I have 4 kids, and people ask me kind of as a parent, what do I want for it? And I always say what I want for them is to be fully free. I want them to be fully free. So what does freedom look like then for you? How would you know that you've met her?
Oh my God. It's an abundance of choice and an abundance of inner knowledge. So let me start with the inner knowledge first. Like, to be able to know yourself, you have to kind of hear yourself. So if you think, I like to think of yourself as a home, right? I'm currently working on like poetry around that, but like think of yourself as a home, like an actual structure, like this room we're in. And I need to know what's behind this painting. I need to know like what's under this plant, like why are these seats this color, and like who else is walking in here and shouldn't be in here and needs to get the hell out, you know? Like an intimate knowledge of yourself to the point like you can hear yourself, you know? Because I've been in moments in my life where I couldn't hear myself, you know? And that's terrible. So an intimate knowledge of self, like all the corners, all the things. Oh, that corner is the laundry we need to... the boxes we haven't unpacked. Okay, so we'll get to it. And so there's that. An abundance of choice means to be free in the world that we live in. I want to be able to build a life where I have choice in the morning. Like my time, I have choice over what my time is going to be spent on. There's no one who's dictating, right? I have choice over what I want to do that day. Right? And because I know myself intimately, I know what I have to do, but I want that to be my choice, right? I want to have an abundance of choice, even in the spaces I put myself in physically. I don't want to have to feel like I have to live here because that's what people do, or have to be here. I don't want that. I want an abundance of choice, which is why like business and financial wellness is so important to me, because then it gives me that choice. It adds, right? I want to have an abundance of choice in terms of like the strength to walk away from spaces that I just don't want to be in. And so that, I feel like those two things go hand in hand, like intimate knowledge of self and just having an abundance of choice. And that really changed, I think this year, or was it last year? I can't remember what it was I was stressing up about. And I remember thinking, look at you stressing, and you actually have an abundance of choice when it comes to the solution. Like you even have the choice to say, I can't make a decision right now. Let me give it like 1 month. I'm like, that is an abundance of choice. Like you're like, I don't have to make a decision now. I'm going to leave it and I'm going to come back to it. And so I want that to kind of like expand, you know?
Yeah. I love that, because I think as African women in particular, there's so much pushing on our energy, our resources, us. And so this idea of choice, abundance of choice, is quite powerful to think about. It's quite a wise way to measure freedom, that you actually have choice. We did an episode recently around choice and women's reproductive health in particular. And I was really surprised on social media when we put the episode out, how people reacted so negatively to this woman's choice to be child-free. And I was like, even her choice, see, so like that abundance of choice does not exist in society. So you have to make it for yourself. And that's quite a profound thing. I have a feeling you'll get there. I have a feeling you'll get there because of the way you're already framing it, you know? I'm wondering and curious, when you think about, you know, creating this home, you said, or the metaphor you were using was home. That must mean that home for you felt safe and felt warm and loving. And you've talked about your mom being your best friend. I've also heard you talk about your sisters a bit, which as both a sibling and as a parent, I love those stories, because I feel like it's a window into somebody who they are. Tell me what your sisters have taught you about creating home and creating a life that you want to live.
I think we grew up in a home that was women only, right? After my mom left my dad.
Yeah.
And I think what I'm beginning to understand, even, I wouldn't say it's a lesson just from my sisters, it's a lesson of like looking at family in hindsight, is that we kind of have evolved. Like we're three sisters and we've all evolved into these different independent personalities is a word, right? And I have an aunt who's always, so she's like, it's weird how I can see different versions of your mom. The three of you. And which speaks to individuality. And I think one of the important things I've learned through looking at them and looking at family in hindsight is something I shared about very recently, is that sometimes with family, we don't see family as humans, and that's so unfair.
Right. They're kind of the furniture of our lives, you know?
And then we have these wildly high, unattainable expectations that we set for family. We also, because we don't see them as humans, we're not intentional about getting to know this person, right? So yes, you have a sibling, but like, are you intentional to try and get to know them, right? And I feel like even with my mom and like kind of like even with my dad, and so there's a lot of work I'm doing in trying to understand them as humans, right? And leave room for them to be humans. And so the title of sibling doesn't come first. It's like you're human and I like you and I dig you. Let's hang out. We just happen to share a surname and have lived together. You know what I mean? Because I've found that even in the African context of family, it can end up being a space that brings you down. And it's not because people are bad. It's just because we don't take the time to see each other as humans and then get to know each other beyond the title of father, mother. You know what I mean? And it's normalized. Like, oh yeah, my dad used to come home and used to run into the bedrooms. This is like, that's not normal, bruh. Like, why should you be scared of this person? Like, that's not healthy. And so I feel like collectively, when I look back at family and like tying it to home, I kind of have had to do the work of thinking of like, where have I failed as well? Where I haven't seen family as human, you know, and I haven't been intentional about getting to know you.
Yeah.
It's easy to sit back and say, you don't know me, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
have you? And so for me, I kind of understood that home requires everybody in that home to be seen. And I think like traditionally, that's just, it's not normal, which is strange.
Yeah, it is strange. I mean, you're causing me to reflect too and think about, I just saw a bunch of my family, like, yeah, how did we interact? And we do kind of operate in the role. Oldest does this, youngest does that, uncle does this, you know? And so being intentional about that is important. I'm going to have to sit with that a little bit.
Yeah.
When you think about the businesses that you're building and the world that you're creating for yourself, because we spend so many hours at work, you know, so there's time at home, but there's so many hours at work. How are you balancing the two? You know, how do you create space for yourself to rest, to create, to build, to project, to plan, to research, all those things? You're doing a lot.
Yeah.
How are you creating the time for everything?
First, I really love my life. Like I have created, you know, sometimes I wake up and I'm just like, hiya, you actually said this is the life I want, and you set, you know, you set the plan in motion, right? And so, for example, I'll say two things to that. The first one is something my friend taught me. Blessing, she's just so wonderful. And you know how we have the word triggers? And she also has glimmers, I think is what she calls them. So moments in the day that bring you joy.
Yeah.
And so I schedule things that bring me joy in my day.
That's awesome.
Right?
Yeah.
So it could be drumming. I'm learning how to play the drums.
How's that going, by the way?
So cool. I had a lesson this morning. Like,
That's
it's
awesome.
so cool. And I remember my teacher today was like, when you're on an international stage, I was like, this is just for joy. Stop bringing.
That pressure. Yes.
So it's when I'm with my plants, you know, if I'm reading, and it's random moments. It can be, you can come to my house at 9 a.m. and I'm drumming. Whereas conventionally, 9 a.m. you should be in front of your desk.
Right.
Typing, right? So I inject those things that I know, no matter how hectic the day is, this is going to bring me joy. And everything else can be scheduled around it, right? So that's one. Number two, I think even with the team, I have hired also based on my weaknesses. So for example, I'm a control freak. So I'll panic if the plan changes. I'm just like, so we're
I don't know anybody like that.
You can relate.
You don't go.
And it can be like the randomest of plans. I don't know it. I know it stems from definitely like childhood issues, but like I love Excel sheets. So if one thing is not going, I'm just like, are you trying to kill me? Or like, which of my enemies sent
my
you?
line is, do you hate me? I mean, because clearly this tells me you hate me. Yeah.
And so I've hired the person I deal with a lot. Her name is Mercy on my team. She's the opposite. She's very organized. And that, you know, I love, right? And she holds me accountable. Like, hey, you've not done this, you've done that. But she will also, when I'm like, this is, even before I get to the point of like, it's terrible, like, I guess this is a flop or whatever. She'll always be like, this is great. Like, so now we've learned A, B, C, D, or like, this is how we're going to counter this. Like, she jumps to the solution, right? And kind of like stabilizes everything. And whenever she does that, I'm like, does she know what she's doing? Like, it's helping me so much right now. And so I feel like I've made sure I hire based on that. And then an acknowledgement of, I'm not all-knowing. I'm not always going to be the host of our podcast or whatever other content we produce. And so I now have an advisory board. And I intentionally did that so that I can step away and also be held accountable, have insights that are not only mine. And it kind of helps you balance out as well so that you hire when you need to, because sometimes you get overwhelmed because you're not hiring when you need to because it's your baby. And you kind of like can have an overview approach to your business. Yeah.
I like that idea. It's very holistic in terms of your strengths, your weaknesses as a leader, and then also the long-term health of the business, which definitely do go hand in hand. You know, the business also includes the Adelle Onyango Initiative. Tell us about why that felt necessary to you.
I think I started, you know, I'm a survivor as well of sexual violence. And I've always started campaigns or just small projects out of anger. Like before, it was purely out of anger. And I was just like, nobody's talking about rape. Nobody's addressing rape culture. And like, this thing is happening, but you guys are moving like it doesn't. And so that was really irritating to me. And then, so it was very informal the way I did it. I remember at first it was on Facebook, and I'd have 2 therapists who would donate their free time to help survivors of rape kind of like get psychosocial support. And it was literally just like, what's your number? This is her number. Okay, 2 of you match up, go, right? And then we needed to formalize it. So I remember when I think we did it. Yes, we did it in lockdown. So that was 2020.
Some good things came out of lockdown.
Yeah.
You're the second person today to say that. During lockdown, we created this thing.
Because like our curriculum developer was like stuck in the States because like borders were closed and everything. So we came together with a curriculum developer and 4 therapists, and we created a curriculum of a group therapy program. And it was designed to be able to help any African who has survived sexual violence, right, in its various forms. And so then began the process of looking for funding or partners. And I have to say a huge thank you to Carolina for Kibera. They're locally based but global NGO.
Yeah, I know Carolina for Kibera.
Yes. And so they actually run the operations for Safe 247, which is a program. And I remember the first meeting was meant to be just a meeting to be like, this is what I want to do, blah, blah, blah. And we ended up meeting for the whole day because they said yes. And then it was like, well, I guess we might as well iron everything out while I'm here. Yeah. And we were able to run 3 cohorts of it.
Amazing.
And now we just kind of need more funding to keep running the program. But what was really powerful is we couldn't get funding for the program initially. And we had been on calls, these points. I remember one, we got to the very end. And because we couldn't prove that Nairobi, which is where it was going to start, was a war zone or war-torn area, we didn't get the funding. And I was like, but we can't lie. Like, I don't understand what you... And are you understanding the problem we're trying to have a solution towards, right? So then what I did is there was 16 days of activism, I think that year. I asked people on my social media, like literally we just ran an online campaign and we told people, these are the number of women we want to access and help. And this is how much we need. Even if you send 50 shillings, it's fine. Yeah. And literally our first cohorts were run based on the funds we raised from individuals.
That's
like
amazing.
People just, and across 16 days, you know? Yeah. And it's been very difficult because I feel like the NGO world, when you're trying to get funding, there's like trendy problems.
Yes, there are. Yes,
so like even now it's like, okay, that's great, but how is your program, how is it linked to climate change?
I was just about to say, if you're not linking to climate now, almost forget it.
And I have such a fundamental issue with that because I'm just like, what's happening? Like, why are we, this is not what's trending on Twitter. These are actual lives that are being disrupted by actual global issues. We can't say some are hot and some are not. Like that's absurd. And so, I think that's the thing in that space that I've been like, it's not very ethical.
No, it's not. But I want to talk about a few things about what you've said. First, originally just you were saying you were creating a lot of things out of anger initially because people were not talking about it. At the same time, we hear about FGM, we hear about this and that. This year, the femicide we started the year marching and protesting. Where do you think the conversation was missing? When you said we weren't talking about it, where was the conversation missing that you thought, hello?
This was like in I think the first initiative I did was like No Means No.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably in 2009, 2010.
Because I feel like we as women talk about it. So where did you want the conversation to go? Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Back then, because I was 19, 20, it was not conversations I was having even friend groups or like campus. There were no like, let's say, set spaces for us to have these conversations. So I didn't see it in the news. Those were really different times, right? Like the stories were just never covered. Yet because I had survived it, I was like, but I know it happens, you know? That's one. I think now the conversation is being had. Oh, before I even get to now, I still remember the first time joining Twitter and loving it because I was connecting with like groups in South Africa and Ghana, and they were like, you can learn, this is how people are doing
South Africa in particular, they've been way ahead for a long time.
And I'm like, so this is how you run this program, and kind of like understanding terminology. There was so much goodwill back then, and it was like the same thing we were seeing on Facebook, because when we started No Means No, it was just a Facebook group. Because there were no Facebook pages even. It was a Facebook group.
That's really old.
And so I loved being online because I was learning so much. But now I feel like what happened over time is something I haven't wrapped my head around, is people don't come online to learn per se, you know? And so even the conversations, it's not like we're having a conversation where I'm open to learning. That has shifted completely. And I also find it difficult to have a conversation where you're making me debate my deservingness of dignity and safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like it's insulting to myself for me to participate in that, right? Absolutely. And the other thing is like, how do I teach you to see me as a being worth of dignity and a being worth of safety? That's such a, like, what does that class look like? You know what I mean? And so the conversation now, I feel I don't understand its point, because it's very clearly changed from a space where people have come to learn. So I'm like, I don't understand.
Well, the users have changed too, right?
This
we
is
have
also
a whole
true.
new generation online now who don't use social media in that same way.
Exactly. So for me, it's more looking at the interventions that are really tangible. So it's psychosocial support. It's actual medical support. So like physical medical support. It's the judiciary system. So I co-wrote a book. So with my...
Which I could not find, by the way.
Really?
Out of stock in 3 different places I checked. Could not find. I was like, why didn't I just ask her directly?
I was meant to bring you a copy. I remember thinking in the morning, but hold me to it. We'll connect. And so with her, we do trainings like for judiciary members, so policemen, lawyers, judges, like for them to understand the issue. And so it's like and there's spaces coming up in Kenya that are looking at our gaps. So we have a huge gap in like evidence preservation. So how do we channel and lobby for funds to go there? Because that actually affects a survivor's access to justice, right?
Absolutely.
So I feel like now I'm like, okay. These are the tangible spaces I want to be in to actually say change A to B, because then we are seeing B works better.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your book, because I think it's an extension of this initiative, Our Broken Silence.
Yes.
I loved the title.
Yeah.
Which speaks to kind of what you were saying earlier, that you were not hearing the conversation. So there was silence. The book details testimonials, stories, experiences, your own included.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what that process was like.
Yeah.
Was it hard? Was it therapeutic? Was it liberating? I don't know. Yeah.
That was also during the lockdown. And I was very happy. My co-author, her name is Lanji, and she's a wonderful Kenyan woman who's also very driven to ensuring, because she has a legal background, survivors get access to justice, and she wants policy change, etc. And we both understand the power of stories and storytelling. And when we started that, and we both have chapters, and then we have the testimonials from other people, survivors, people in different support communities around survivors. And so writing my chapter was very difficult, of course, because you have to go to certain spaces that you've stepped away from for a while. But I found that what I loved about writing it at that time is I'd come back home. And so I kind of understood that my body hadn't betrayed me and I could love it again. So that kind of like relationship with my body was in such a good place. And I could write about falling in love with your body, experiencing even love in a physical form again after sexual trauma. And these are all like taboo topics, you know what I mean? And I was like, sex on its own, talking about it is like, hey, don't even go there, right? So can you imagine how hectic it is when there's sexual trauma as the undertones? And so I loved that I was in a less angry place. And I could write with such clarity, you know? I think the only angry piece in my chapter is a piece about a memo from the University of Nairobi when there were cases of sexual violence that their students had survived. And they kind of like wrote this memo talking about what students should be wearing. They shouldn't be at this point in the night. And I was just like, honestly, in this day and age, have you not been listening to us for a decade, you know? And you are the university, right? If
you're setting culture,
exactly.
You're setting culture's agenda.
And so I think that was the one angry thing.
But you know, anger has a purpose, right? It has a service. Because I'm thinking about you writing that book, maybe it can only come after you have experienced deep anger and you've put your voice out there and you've spoken up, and now you can come to the next step in that process. You know, I mean, it has a purpose.
100%. And I think for a while, I didn't let my anger breathe and be. And so it just became this like little passenger, really irritating passenger. And like the thing is like, because I don't want to be angry, you're going to stay angry because you're not processing it. So it's just there, and just allowing myself to feel the anger because it's valid. Like something happened to you that you're allowed to be angry about it. And then you kind of release it, you know? I think trying to suppress it was not pretty smart on my end, because then it just kind of came and kept sipping out every so often. And so I think processing it allowed me to get into the next phase of my life that I didn't have to have this darkness looming.
Did something else replace the anger? Was there a different emotion or presence in your life that took the space of that emotion?
I would say ease and love. Oh my goodness. Like I feel like, have you ever, many people have driven, when you release the handbrake, you feel your car like, that feeling, like that is that is what I felt. And like, I feel the ease and the like relaxedness. And then I just feel love. I feel like everything I try and do now moves from love, especially for myself, because that was lacking for a long time. And so it's even like the small things, even like chores. I don't exactly like washing dishes. Like I'm always like, I live alone.
Why there's so many dishes?
Just on Tuesday. Wednesday, why are we here again? Like, is there a ghost, you know? But like even things like chores, I don't even see them as chores. I'm like, hey babe, I love you. I want you to live in a house that's like this. Or like eating, I'm trying to put on weight. And I'm like, you know, I love you. Can we just eat like this? Sleeping on time. I love you. I want you to be rested. You know what I mean? And so like moving from love has been so more like I think that's why they call love it's like radical, and it's like a rebellion, you know what I mean? It can bring about such huge change. I feel it. And so what replaced it was ease and love, and I'm just like kind of moving from love.
Bell Hooks writes about that, about love being the most radical of self-expressions. We'll exchange books. I'll give you this Bell Hooks. Actually, her book, there's a collection of essays called Love for your book. Because you're right, that's a really powerful replacement when anger had a chance to be processed. Love stepped in. Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So many questions. I'm on question 5, according to my notes here, 1 hour later. But I think it's worth kind of talking about your work on the global level. You have done so much of I mean, just talking to you, it is clear you have done the internal work. You have done the external work. You've done the business work. You have been intentional. And that has brought you to a lot of tables of power and of influence. You've spoken to heads of state. I think famously, we all saw the clip of you talking to President Macron and really giving him some thoughts. We have seen you at gatekeepers events with Bill and Melinda Gates and other, power brokers in the world. Again, setting an agenda for African youth in particular, which has been extraordinary. Well done, I want to say to you. Because I see you here and I'm talking to you, and that's the same Adelle I saw on those stages. Dynamic, powerful, clear, authentic. That's very hard to do. And I admire that in you. Tell me, when you come to those places of influence and power and opportunity, who else are you wanting to bring to the table? What is your priority when you come to those moments?
I feel like those moments, first at the beginning, I used to get imposter syndrome, right? Because I'd be like, oh, I'm not in those rooms. You're hearing people like, oh, I have a PhD and I don't know what, and all of these things, and you're just like,
I have a podcast.
I also don't know what I'm doing here,
Yeah.
But I think the courage to speak truth is not common. And so that is important in those rooms, right?
Yeah.
And the voice that speaks truth doesn't need to look a certain way or have PhD or doctor or whatever before their name. By virtue of being a being who is living in this world, if there's a table that is discussing what happens in this world, I had to learn that I deserve to be there because I am a being of this world. You know what I mean? Not because of all these other worldly tags, right? And that I have a very nice relationship with the truth, and I don't shy away from sharing it. That's one. But I think also in terms of the honesty Africans need to bring to these conversations, right? And so for a long time, I mean, it's even still happening now, our representatives or the people who would represent us at those conversations as African countries, as Africans, would be our leaders, right? And they do a poor job, an extremely poor job, just a terribly poor job. That it's I'm laughing because that's how terrible
I'm laughing
it is,
to keep from crying,
right?
Yes.
And so I feel like, back to your questions, the first people that we shouldn't bring to those rooms are the presidents or anybody in those circles, right? Because first, there's a detachment they have that is just embarrassing. There's a lack of foresight they have that's also equally embarrassing. There's a very colonial mindset they have of just ooh, I've just greeted Prince so-and-so or this president from I don't know which Western country, and that's enough. And no, it's not. Are you crazy, right? Yeah. There is a recklessness when you think of how much they spend on frivolous trips. I think our president is on one now that cost us a lot of money. And when you see the list of the things they're saying have happened or they're counting as achievements, it's that could have been a Zoom call. I really don't understand why you went, right? And so I think in these rooms, one, I don't want those people there. Two, I want people who, when I walk in, I want to be able to capture the conversations we have in our living rooms or whatever, where we're disgruntled, either by the way our countries are being governed or the partnerships our leaders are getting into, the lack of information, the lack of trickle down, the lack of, what is it called? Ethics, the corrupt way these partnerships are drawn up. I want those conversations to come into the room with me, and I want the people on the other side to understand that Africa has strengths, we're solving for global problems. I get it. The people who you used to meet with before never used to bring that kind of energy, but it's there. We're solving, and I don't feel like you have to play respectability politics when you're in there. You know what I mean?
You're there for a reason.
You speak the truth and you know the truth, right? And I feel like when you're in there and you get access to those rooms, it's a huge responsibility because not every African does. And you have to kind of speak truth to power. And and call them out. I feel like it's balanced, because even with the speech to Macron, yes, there's madness. Like, you cannot be running a country that is void of democracy and come and teach us about democracy. There's that. Please.
Number one.
We're in the same boat, brother, right?
Yeah.
That's one. But also, we acknowledge we have corrupt leaders. And you also have corrupt leaders. Why are you partnering with our corrupt leaders? By the way, on ground, we don't want you to partner with these people, in case you didn't know. And so I feel like in those rooms is to bring that energy and to really understand that if you have a good relationship with truth, then there's that responsibility to bring it up. And the last thing I'll say is that I'm just sorry, because I can go on and on about our leaders and just like how ridiculous they are. But the lack of empathy, I feel like it's probably on a level of, like, in psychology, how they say psychopaths have no empathy. They're borderline there, because sometimes I will see things happening in it. For example, there was a picture, and I hope I don't get you should run that thing.
The disclaimer.
The views of the...
Yes.
This is mine. This is Adelle's view. There was a picture of our president, Ruto, buying something from a child who was hawking. What the hell?
Yeah.
Like, children,
why is this child not in school?
This is a child hawking. Why is the child hawking? And you're there, like, and it's kind of like a PR moment of like, he's so one with the people. That's madness, right? And the people are judged by how they treat the most vulnerable, and children are vulnerable, right? So
Absolutely.
how do you do that and you're just okay? Or like, how do you hear a child is killed in demolitions, right? Why is everything so rough to the people? Where is the empathy? It just actually doesn't exist, and it's crazy. And so I feel like what I will end with saying is like, the definition of a good leader we need to go back to the drawing book and be like, what does that mean? Right now, Kenyans define that as somebody who has money or like comes from a particular tribe. We need to redefine it, okay? Because just because you have money doesn't mean you have ethics, value. Like, what are your values? Foresight. Where do you want to drive this country to, right? You just happen to have money. Cool. Yeah. There's so much more we need that makes a good leader. And because we haven't defined it, we're kind of moving blind. And because we think we don't deserve it, there's a feeling of like, oh, but things have always been like this. Yeah. But they don't always have to be like this. Absolutely. And so, yeah, man, that one, I can go on, and I might get you banned. So.
No. Well, it begs the question, Adelle, I have to ask, is there a political future for you?
The structures, our political and governance structures in this country do not favor good leaders, right? So even if you think about running for office, I just don't have the funds. And if I go looking for the funds elsewhere, I might have to compromise my values, right? And so I feel like the structure in itself needs to change radically. Like that has to happen, like a big moment. But I would never say never. But I think now, if you look at Boniface Mwangi, and if people watched Softy, and you saw people ridiculing him, the voters ridiculing him because he didn't have money to bribe them. And why did he have to? Even if he had, why do I have to bribe you? See, you should be asking me questions about like, what do I intend to do for your constituency, right? And so I feel like so much needs to change, that I know as the structures that are now will not allow a good leader to be effective.
Well, you've said it.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much truth in what you've said, and what a tragedy that our systems don't incentivize civil servants, civic-minded people to take part in a more structured way, because the incentive is not there, which is maybe I hope that will change, not just for Kenya, but for all of us.
Yes.
Even your cousins up here to the north, as I like to call myself, we're sitting in a very similar situation.
Yeah.
We have to, at some point, end this conversation, but I want to ask you a couple questions. because you've talked about, just this political piece about leadership, kind of in some ways to me goes back to what you were saying about being self-actualized at 40 and this idea of freedom and this idea that is what you're seeking for yourself. I hear it's what you're seeking for your country.
Yes.
I mean, it's this pursuit I feel like we're all constantly in. You also wrote a poem called Freedom. And when I asked you before the interview if you would read it, you're like, I've written so many poems called Freedom. Let me see which one this is. So in case people don't know your poetry, I would love it if you would read this poem and tell us a little bit about its inspiration. And then we will try and wrap this interview. But I just love that your activism, your passions come out in many forms.
Yeah.
There's Adelle, media personality, podcaster, media, leader, business owner. And then there's Adelle the poet, which feels like the most tender, piece
and
of you. I love
the
it.
strongest.
Yeah,
That's
and the
one who's
strongest. Isn't
steering
that something?
for
The
sure.
a tender reed shall not be broken. There's a scripture that says. So I printed it out. Let me find the right one.
Good. First, let me see it. And see
Are you a spoken word artist who's gonna
Oh my goodness!
Do you need to stand up or anything?
Most times I tell people, close your eyes, please focus, because I love words so much. And I'm trying to read this one to see which version it was.
Which freedom it is.
Yes. Because, there's another one I wrote during Freedom, and it was around lockdown and how the cops were just brutal.
Those curfews were.
And so I wrote that. I don't think it's this one. No, it's
I
not
think
this one.
I don't think it's this one. This one is, I don't have a police-oriented theme, no.
Okay. I think this one is more about, you picked the right one because this is more of releasing yourself. So I'm not a spoken word artist. I like people meeting my words where they are,
Fair.
Okay, cool. And when I closed my eyes, I could feel it. It felt like the relief, a drop of sweet sighs on my forehead on a hot sunny day. Like wafts of love's breath dancing on my lips, like the dance of my fingers tracing across fields of passion, like I was home. I was home, grasping pieces of a broken me in clenched fists I had used in the battle with my consciousness. Battle because when I closed my eyes, I could see it and it scared me. It looked like a cloak of confidence sheltering naivety, like rows of dead apologies, like a path paved with nodding coincidences. It looked like home. I was home, wrapped in verses of failure that I held close to my skin for years. Skin that sang stories of mines in chains and the girl that never belonged. Even though I tried, because when I closed my eyes, I could hear it. It sounded like 1,000 souls liberated by a birth that almost called death. Like a captured voice returned, like breaking chains, like feet greeting the ground, slowly at first, then rushing towards the first meeting with what they had known all their lives, home. I like this poem. I haven't read it in a while.
I like it too. Do you remember what inspired it?
That definitely is. It's so crazy how it's so linked to what we talked about. And it's coming home. So I can for example, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do this, right? So the first stanza speaks to how coming home and coming back to yourself is such a relief. It's like a sunny day and you're just breathing that sigh of relief when you finally get some coolness. And grasping pieces of broken me in clenched fists, right? So it's like you were in battle and you were trying to save yourself. And it's a cloak of confidence, right? And so that's really what it is, right? And I think what I loved is wrapped in verses of failure that I held close to my skin for years. I think sometimes what keeps us away from ourselves is all these terrible words or places in our lives where we feel like we've failed, but we hold on to those things, right? If I ask you what your weakness is or a moment where you didn't do something right, you have them
right there,
right? And it's we hold these things as our identity, and when you let go, you find it's a sigh of relief, and you're finally home. And so,
I like it. And I think it's also quite a powerful metaphor. It could be for the country as well. There's this line that you have in here, a row of dead apologies. That's what I thought. I was like, this sounds political. this is, but I think that's the beauty of poetry.
Exactly. You meet the words where,
exactly
where
you are,
yeah.
where the words are, and it's this really powerful intersection. Adelle, it's been so fun talking to you about all these things. We're going to do a fun game in a minute, but people have to come back for the bonus content for that.
Yeah.
But before we let you go for this part of the conversation, we ask all of our guests 2 questions. So we've had on, authors, we've had on human rights activists, we've had on tech entrepreneurs, we've had on a lot of different kinds of people, but we try and close with the 2 same questions because we like to see the through line in humanity.
Yeah.
So the first question is, what is your favorite drink?
Oh my goodness. Right now, okay, there are 2.
That's fine.
And I feel like they're listening. So the 2 drinks is like
your imagination is so powerful. I love it.
So I really love hibiscus juice.
Oh, I love hibiscus
too. And I
yeah.
love making it for myself and I love it. And I love virgin mojitos. I'm seriously trying to decrease how much alcohol I take in. And I just realized, I'm like, hey guys, you didn't tell me cocktails that don't have alcohol are so fun and you can play around with them, and so I'm enjoying those 2 drinks.
Also, and they're cheaper.
And they're cheaper. My goodness, I paid. I think I was out a week ago, and I paid 700 shillings the entire night. I was just like, what?
The whole night. Imagine. Look at you, richer, sober, everything. It's a win-win-win.
Exactly. Yeah. So those 2 drinks.
Awesome. You picked some good ones. I love hibiscus too. And then finally, we would love to know, what is bringing you joy today?
What is bringing me joy
today? What's that glimmer for you today?
The glimmer for me today, I'm trying to think of my day. Honestly, it's just, it's probably the same every day, but I'm so proud that I was courageous enough to curate the life I've always wanted, right? Right down to what, my routine is mine, and I'm not answerable to someone else. Today I started my day with a drum class at 9, I'm probably going to go home and buy plants because I want them planted tomorrow. You know what I mean? What a strange thing to be doing on a Thursday, right?
Sounds like a wonderful experience.
Right? Yeah. And so I feel like what brings me joy is just myself and the person I am and what I've intentionally given myself, which is what I've always wanted.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's been so fun talking to you. I've really been a long-time admirer, both as a fellow storyteller, as a business person, and you are everything you say you are and more.
Thank you.
You were just, Thank you. I've so loved having this time with you. Thank you for
coming
on this show.
This is so awesome.
I'm so glad you were here. And listeners, we'd love to hear from you as well. So drop us a message on any of our socials at Selam and Hello, Selam with an E. And if you have questions for Adelle or something, send them our way. We'll pass them on. But we would love to hear from you. And until we see you again, peace.
Worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then we say, hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on.